26th of February, number of the day could have been anything between a few million, 100 million, tens of millions, billions, trillions. Yes, I'm going to give you this one. One. Why? Because we have one frigate, we have one submarine, and Aakash, Bramdeo, we have to talk about, in my mind, the lack of money, the lack of urgency that is going to our defense when you look at defense budgeting in contrast to everything else.
In a best case scenario, based on the 2026 budget, the funding for defense was either flat or it in fact went down slightly.
Yeah.
It just depends on how you choose to look at it. And if you take into account that we've got this massive coastline, and we don't just protect South African waters, we've got SADC countries, none of whom have anything of a meaningful navy. So theoretically, we've got this entire SADC coastline that nobody currently patrols, and something that we should, and we simply don't have the equipment, the vessels to be able to do so.
And the problem is we're not going to get the equipment, we're not going to get the vessels, because go through some of the numbers for me. Give me the context here, what we are getting for defense versus some of the other big costs for the country. I think it just paints such a nice picture how low the commitment is. So
the most expensive thing that we spend money on, or that we will be spending money on in the upcoming financial year, is social grants. And we're going to be spending 446 billion rand
with a B.
With a B. Second is our debt repayments at 426 billion rand. So you look at the two top line items, and none of them contribute meaningfully to the economy.
That is drag.
They just absolutely. And then you have something like defense, which comes in at just under 60 billion. And defense is absolutely, if you look at the fact that we have these massive fishing stocks off our coast, you have around the Southern African region, you have an even extended coastline, and it's simply not being patrolled. And as a result, anybody can come into our territorial waters and do as they please, steal our fishing stocks, which we also know is something that has been done. But over and above that, there's also the threat of piracy.
I was about to ask that, because you can't just look at our coastline in isolation. There's been issues up northern Mozambique side. Obviously, we can go much higher than that to, off the coast of East Africa as well. And I would have imagined if you looked at Africa and you looked at South Africa, there would be an expectation that an economy our size would have a better system of defense, and other countries would look to us for it. But I don't feel they actually would look to us for help, because we can't help them.
Well, when you look at the money that we do spend on defense, most of it is geared towards the army, where from an economic perspective, a lot of our focus should in fact be on the Navy. And when you look at the amount of money that's allocated to the Navy, it's a pittance. Do we really need an Air Force? Is there really going to be such a serious threat? Well, perhaps not. That having been said, it could become a lot more cost efficient, instead of sending patrol ships out, to cover this massive area that we need to, is to have an eye in the sky. Back in the day, we operated long distance aircraft that patrolled, and if they spotted something significant, they sent out a Navy vessel. We lost that capacity many, many years ago, and it simply hasn't been replaced. But of course, what we could do these days is consider drone technology, because you could put up a drone, it could remain in the air for many, many hours, but then you'd need the enforcement, right? Once you pick up a threat, you'd need to be able to send some sort of manpower into that area to counter whatever threat there may be. And unfortunately, our Navy simply doesn't have that capacity. Our frigates, and even though we call them corvettes, they designed to pack the punch of a frigate. We're not designed to be patrol vessels. And what we lack is an offshore patrol vessel or patrol vessels that will patrol our coastline. And when they pick up something that's suspicious, that's when you send out your frigates.
I think the other issue as well is got to be with, even though we're talking about what could be seen as a lot of money for defense, if you were to now try and bring our defense up to standard, this kind of money isn't good enough, because the technology you're talking about, first of all, the shortage of technology, and we haven't kept up with technology. In order for us to bring our defense up to international standards, that amount is not even going to nearly cover it. I mean, we're just trying to put a plaster over it right now, aren't we?
We are. And also, let's look at what's happening around the world. Trump is spending a lot more on defense. China is spending a lot more on defense. India and Russia are doing exactly the same. NATO, Trump has forced NATO to push up their defense spending. And ever increasingly, as the world chooses to go it alone because Trump is very much on self-reliance as an economy, it becomes ever increasingly important that you are able to defend yourself. And let's look at our track record in that particular instance. A couple of years ago, we got a bloodied nose in the Central African Republic. More recently, the M23 rebels in the eastern DRC did exactly the same. And it's a very worrying factor that our defense force is not where it should be. Recently, we had Armed Forces Day. And as impressive as some of those vehicles were, they were all designed in the 70s and the 80s. We haven't designed anything new in the last 30-odd years. While the world today fights with ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles,
IBMs, yeah.
cruise missiles, we are still dependent on Rattles and Oliphant tanks that were developed in the 1960s.
One of the other things that's going to come up, and I don't doubt this, as we start saying goodbye for today, is the army now being deployed to assist the police. So what we're talking about there as far as defense is concerned as well, part of the conversation, I think, for most people is now defense and the army in Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and Gauteng is also going to be an added cost to this sort of budget because that was never there before. But because of what we heard in Sona, the money has to come from somewhere. I'm not sure if these two are going to be linked, but a lot of attention now on the army and defense.
So the money has been allocated for the internal deployment, but as many people would argue, is deploying your defense force for effectively a policing function effective enough? One can only hope that whilst the army is there, a relative peace remains, and that provides the opportunity to deal with a more lasting peace. That's all that you can hope for. But is the army going to go in and solve the problem? No. And the issues that result from gangsterism are a lot deeper than something that you can solve with a weapon. But at the end of the day, our number for today is 1. That's the number of frigates that we have that we could deploy, as well as a single submarine of the 3 that we purchased. Our number of the day, 1.